The beauty of death. It takes the sadness of life to appreciate the beauty of death. This story is dedicated to my grandfather Elmer, who took his own life. Many wonder why some commit suicide. Perhaps this story will help explain the reason. His best friend had been dead for about a month. When the phone rang, midnight, cold in the house, and me dragged up from sleep to answer the call. His wife was gone for the weekend. Me, alone in the house, and the phone ringing. Better answer it. It might be important. Hello? Hello, Jason? Who is this? You know me. It's Elmer. Your best friend. Cold. Deep and intense. The receiver dead cold matter in my hand. Elmer died 4 weeks ago. 4 weeks, 3 days, 2 hours, and 27 minutes ago, to be exact. I want to know who you are. A chuckle. The same dry chuckle I'd heard so many times. Come on, old buddy, after 20 years. Hell, you know me. This is a damned poor joke. No joke, Jason. You're there alive. And I'm here dead. And you know something, old buddy. I'm really glad I did it. Did what? Killed myself. Because death is just what I hoped it would be. No sadness or disappointment, or worries. Absolutely beautiful, peaceful, quiet, content, complete, and where I belong, no pressures. Death is a paradise without tears or suffering. Elmer's death was ruled an accident. A concrete freeway barrier. His car. I aimed my car for that barrier. The phone voice told me. Pedal to the floor. Doing over 90 when I hit. No accident, Jason. The voice cold. Cold. I wanted to be dead. And no regrets. I tried to laugh, make light of this madness, matching his chuckle with my own. Dead men don't use telephones. I'm not really using the phone, not in a physical sense. It's just that I chose to contact you this way. You might say it's a matter of psychic electricity. As a detached spirit, I'm able to align my cosmic vibrations to match the vibrations of this power line. Simple, really? Sure, a snap. Nothing to it. Naturally, you're skeptical. I expected you to be. But listen carefully to me, Jason. And I listened, with the phone gripped in my hand in that cold night house, as the voice told me things that only Elmer could know. Intimate details of shared experiences extending back through 2 decades. And when he'd finished, I was certain of one thing. He was my best friend, Elmer. But how? I still don't. Think of this phone as a medium, a line of force through which I can bridge the gap between us. The dry chuckle again. Hell, you gotta admit it beats holding hands around a table in the dark, yet the principle is the same. I'd been standing by my desk, transfixed by the voice. Now I moved behind the desk, and sat down, trying to absorb this dark miracle. My muscles were wire-taut, my fingers cramped about the black receiver. I dragged in a slow breath, the night dampness of the room pressing at me. All right. I don't believe in ghosts, don't pretend to understand any of this, but I'll accept it. I must accept it. I'm glad, Jason, because it's important that we talk. A long moment of hesitation. Then the voice, lower now, softer. I know how bad things have been for you. What do you mean? I just know how things are going for you. And I want to help. As your friend, I want you to know that I understand. Well, I'm really not. You've been feeling bad, haven't you? Kind of down, right? Yeah. A little, I guess. And I don't blame you. You've got reasons. Lots of reasons. For one, it has been what? About 2 years since you lost your son to a car accident right after his graduation, right? I know the both of you were close. Jason's heart sank, thinking back to all the good times he and his son shared together. The first time he taught his son how to play catch football. When his son made his first touchdown in high school. When he taught his son how to drive. When he bought his son his very own car and the smile on his face. His friend Elmer went on. There's your money problem. You are behind on your house payments. I'm expecting a raise. My boss promised me one, within the next few weeks. You won't get it, Jason. I know. He's lying to you. Right now, at this moment, he's looking for another to replace you at the company. Your boss is planning to fire you. He never liked me. We never got along from the day I walked into that office. And your wife. All the arguments you've been having with her lately. It's a pattern, Jason. Your marriage is all over. Your wife is going to ask you for a divorce. She's in love with another man. Who, damn it? What's his name? You don't know him. Wouldn't change things if you did. She met him in an internet chat room. There's nothing you can do about it now. She just doesn't love you anymore. These things happen to people. We've been drifting apart for the last year, but I didn't know why. I had no idea that she... And then there's your daughter. She's back on it, Jason. Only it's worse now. A lot worse. She has also been selling off her body to any man that would give her money and the attention that you couldn't give her. I knew what he meant, and the coldness raked along my body. She was 16 now, and she'd been into drugs for the past 3 years. But she promised to quit. What do you know about my little princess? Tell me, please. She's into the heavy stuff, Jason. She's hooked bad. It's too late for her. What the hell are you saying? I'm saying she's lost to you. She's rejected you, and there's no reaching her. She hates you. Blames you for everything. Jason knew it was true. It all began when he found out that his daughter had been molested at a young age. But the fact of knowing that he was powerless, that there was nothing he could have done to protect her, agonized his conscience. But I tried to do my best for her. He screamed into the phone. It wasn't enough, Jason. We both know that. You'll never see her again. The blackness was welling within me, a choking wave through my body. Listen to me, old buddy. Things are going to get worse, not better. I know. I went through my own kind of hell when I was alive. I'll start over. Leave the city, go and work with my brother at his business. Your brother doesn't want you in his life. You'd be an intruder. An alien. He never writes or calls you, does he? No, but that doesn't mean. Not even a card last Christmas. No letters or calls. He doesn't want you with him, Jason. He thinks you're a joke. Believe me. And then he began to tell me other things. He began to talk about middle age and how it was too late now to make any kind of new beginning. He told me that soon I would go to see a doctor about being tired all the time and be told that I have cancer, and would eventually die anyway. Do you really want to die a slow, painful death, Jason? To slowly be crippled by cancer, to slowly waste away into nothingness? He spoke of disease, loneliness and disappointment, of rejection and despair, of pain and suffering, and worst of all, sadness. And the blackness was complete, soothing, warm, a blanket that brings both peace and happiness to your soul. There's only one real solution to the curse of life, Jason, just one. That gun you keep in your desk upstairs. Use it, Jason. Use the gun. I couldn't do that. But why not? What other choice have you got? The solution is there. Go upstairs and use the gun. No one will miss you. You are already dead in the minds of those you thought loved you. Didn't you once tell me you wish you were never born? What have you ever amounted to in your sad existence? There is more sadness than happiness in life. How many tears does it take for you to realize that death is the only solution to the pain? Life creates scars that only death can heal. Eventually, your memory will become nothingness in the winds of time. I'll be waiting for you afterward. You won't be alone anymore, Jason. It'll be like the old days. We'll be together. I know you're scared. But death is beautiful, Jason. I know life is ugly and painful and hurtful. But the beauty of death is its gift to end our tears. Use the gun, Jason. Dot the gun. Use the gun. The gun. The gun. It was at that moment that he realized that the worst thing about life was not death. It's what we lose as we live. Jason began to cry. There was only one thing left to do. Unable to cope with the amount of loss he suffered throughout his life, Jason decided to close his eyes for the final time. When his wife came back home, she screamed in horror to find Jason dead in the chair. A shotgun blast blew off his face and splattered his brain on the ceiling and walls. I've been dead for a week now, and my buddy Elmer was right. It's fine here. No sadness, no worries, or suffering. None of the daily stress of having to make a living because I'm no longer alive. Not in a physical form per se. Quiet and beautiful. Peaceful, everlasting tranquility. I know how bad things have been going for you. And they won't get any better. Isn't that your phone ringing? Better answer it. It's important that we talk. The fear of death disappears when one has reached their limit of suffering. Nine rules for the night shift on Halloween night at the cemetery. You sure you have all the rules memorized? My boss said as he gathered his belongings to go home. Yeah, sure thing. I got them all up here, I said as I pointed to my head. He gave me a nod and headed out the door of the small office to go home. My boss was a little off, to say the least. This was my first month as a security guard at a cemetery right around the corner from my residence, and I had just gotten out of college about 3 months ago. The last month of shifts have been boring, sitting around, checking cameras, and doing rounds through the cemetery making sure nothing is out of order. Exciting, right? I needed a source of income, and this was the best paying job I could find. No real experience needed, the flyer said. My take was that they were desperate to find someone fast, so I took advantage of that. I was hired the day that I found the flyer, over the phone. I never even found out the guy's name. Once I came in on my first day, my boss gave me no training, no do's and don'ts, just a verbal list of 9 rules I had to follow and memorize before Halloween night. These rules are to be followed only on Halloween night, he said. You must follow these rules to the exact way they are told to you. If you mess up even a small part, well, you won't mess up. Because I trust you to follow them word for word. I looked at him, confused because this sounded almost like a threat. Nevertheless, I pulled out my phone and started an audio recording so he could record the list. Once he finished telling me the rules, I was in absolute disbelief. This guy is insane. No wonder why no one wants to work here. This guy is actually insane, I thought to myself. I know every place has certain rules to follow. But to designate a set of rules, insane rules, for Halloween night only? I guess you won't know how I felt until I tell you the rules that he gave me, word for word, exactly how he told me, straight from the recording. Rule number 1. On Halloween night, please arrive at 8:30 p.m. No earlier, no later. Do not walk in these doors until it reaches 8:30 for the love of God, please. Rule number 2. Stay inside the office until 9:15. Do not leave, keep yourself occupied, but do not check the security cameras during this time. I'll make sure to turn them off before you get there, so there is no temptation to peek at them. This might be one of the most important rules. If the monitor turns on by itself, do not look either. If for some reason you look, and you see it has revealed the A section of the cemetery, you must turn off the lights of the office, and hide. If it reveals the B or C section, and you look at it, your only option is to run. Good luck with this. To make this easier, just cover the monitor with a jacket or blanket, because you will not want to see what happens out here this time on Halloween night. Rule number 3. After 9:15 strikes, you will have 30 seconds to get out of the office. Leave the door unlocked. It is possible you will pass an unnaturally tall figure, with no facial features. This is not a Halloween costume, and you must tell him, "Good evening," and look him right where his eyes would be. If he doesn't respond, continue on your way to patrol the cemetery. If he says anything at all, you must stand completely still. Do not move a muscle. He might walk around you, but if you keep still until he's done, he should walk away with no problem, go into the office, and he will slam the door behind him. Rule number 4. You will make your way to Section A. Once you inspect Section A, you will realize the gravestone titled, James R. Hackney, is being dug up completely. This is not out of the ordinary. Do not, And I mean, do not pay any attention to what is inside the 6-foot hole in the ground. You will not see the rest of your shift if you look down in that hole. Just keep walking to Section B, and do not look back. Rule number 5. As soon as you cross the bridge from Section A to B, you will notice about a dozen shadow-like figures standing around in a circle around the big oak tree to the left of the bridge. Please listen closely to what I'm about to say. You must find the figure wearing the black top hat. You will walk up behind him and ask, "Am I clear?" If you hear a voice from inside your head say, "Continue," then you can carry on to Section B. If you don't hear anything, you must wait. You can look over to the section at this time, but I recommend keeping your eyes down. Trust me. There will be no physical harm to you if you look, but I can't promise you will be emotionally intact after looking. Rule number 6. Once you get the go-ahead, continue on to Section B. You may walk around and do what you would normally do every night here. The only catch is you must stay in this section until 10 o'clock. It should be 9:30 to 9:45 by now, so you won't have to wait long. After the time crosses 10 o'clock, continue on. Rule number 7. After walking out of Section B, you will notice a strange temperature change and lighting change. The time will have jumped to 2 a.m. after crossing. Do not panic, and please do not answer your phone. Your phone will be ringing constantly. As soon as it starts ringing, you will stand still and not move until it stops. It will be calls from your mother, father, siblings, girlfriend, boyfriend, anyone you can think of. You must not answer these calls. It is not actually them calling, it is in fact the man that you saw earlier, the one with no facial features. He is trying to lure you back to the office. You must stay away from that office until I tell you to go back. Your phone will stop ringing after about a half hour, which leaves you at around 2:30 a.m. You can continue on at this point. Rule number 8. You will notice another time jump, this one 2 more hours from 2:30 to 4:30. If the time still says 2:30 after the calls stop, you are in trouble. Unfortunately, there is nothing you can do here. You messed up a step at some point if you end up here. You can finally finish your inspection of Section C. You must be prepared for a woman covered in blood to run up to you begging for help. She will be asking you where her baby is, and if you can come fast to help her. Do not be startled, no matter how loud she yells. Tell her you will meet her outside the cemetery in 10 minutes, for her to wait there. She will run off in the opposite direction, and that's how you know you succeeded. There will be a lot of towels and rags all over the ground covered in blood around Section C. This is the only maintenance you will have to do. Just pick them up and dispose of them in the waste bin closest to you. Rule number 9. After completing this final task, you must run back to your office. Do not look anywhere but ahead of you, you will see figures everywhere. You will hear your name being called from voices that you think you recognize, just keep running. Once you reach the office, you will see the faceless man leaving the office building. It should be 5 a.m. at this point. He will stop you and either say, "Good work," and nod at you, and you will slowly walk into the office and close the door. For the remainder of the shift, you can check the cameras, sit down, and go on with your shift until I come inside to start my shift. Or he would say, "Come with me." If he says come with me, you will run and lock yourself in the office. Do not fall for his calm, monotone voice. He is anything but calm if you mess up. Do not let him in, and wait for him to stop banging on the door. Once this stops, cover your eyes for the last hour of your shift. Don't look around until you hear 3 knocks on the door. This will be me to relieve you of your shift. You won't be called in for a few weeks, to come to terms with what you have seen, and you will be paid a handsome amount of money for your duties. Now that you have listened to the rules as well, I hope you can understand my initial suspicion and why I was so baffled. I thought this was a joke, until I finished my shift. After I arrived at 8:30, my boss left, and I decided I was going to just follow the rules given to me, to humble him and be a good sport of the prank. I didn't check the cameras, and I headed out the door. After going outside, the brisk fall air hit me as I saw a tall man walking up to me. I looked at him, and he was actually faceless. It looked so real, and kind of gave me the creeps. I almost forgot to tell him, "Good evening." He looked at me, well, I think he did, and continued on through the door. I shivered a little as I headed on straight to Section A. I arrived at the entrance, and I searched for James R. Hackney's grave, a grave I always saw, as it was the biggest one there. To my disbelief, it was actually being dug up. I felt sick to my stomach that they would go this far to scare me, so I hurried past the grave as a wave of uneasiness came over me. This can't be real, I reassured myself as I headed across the bridge to Section B. I scanned for the oak tree, and when I finally found it, I noticed the figures my boss warned me about. I instantly spotted the one with the top hat. I unsteadily scurried over to him, and asked, "Am I clear?" No answer. As I stood there, waiting for an answer that never came, I decided to look away from the man and peek over to Section B because surely the pranksters wanted me to look, since they warned me against it. I froze and felt pins and needles in my hands as I saw myself standing there in the distance. At least what looked like me, except I was taller and covered in blood. As the figure that presumably was me stared back, it let out a screech and started running towards me. I was startled and absolutely mortified by this, and turned around to run. I looked back, and as it reached its arms out, it completely vanished. As soon as it vanished, I heard a voice from within my head say, "Continue." At this point, I had a million thoughts running through my head as I started to realize whatever was happening was somehow impossibly real, and I felt my mind switch from confused to defensive. I inspected the area until 10 p.m., constantly looking over my shoulder. I checked my phone and saw it was time to move to Section 3. I felt exactly what I was told, a temperature change, and saw the surroundings get just a little bit darker. It was noticeably colder. No way, I told myself as I reached for my phone, which displayed 2 a.m. Before I could form another thought, my phone rang right on cue and stopped dead in my tracks. "Dad," the phone displayed. I stared back at the phone, as I looked at those 3 letters. I never knew my dad, and definitely never had him saved in my phone. I felt a tear form in my eye because this was a very sensitive topic to me. I let it ring as I got lost in a trance of thinking about how on earth any of this was even possible. The ringing finally stopped, and I let out a sigh of relief. I remembered the next rule about the time, and opened my phone again. 2:30. I kept moving on with some stray tears in my eyes, watching my phone turn from 2:30 to 4:30. This was a relief to me because now that I knew this was somehow real, I realized I have done all the steps right to this so far. As I started inspecting Section 3 with cold fingers and numb toes, I heard screaming. Naturally, this scared the hell out of me, and I jumped out of my shoes. I snapped my head around to a blood-covered woman screaming, "My baby! I can't find my baby!" I told her. After a bit of hesitation, I told her to meet me at the entrance of the cemetery in 10 minutes. She nodded and ran off, and I noticed a ton of blood-covered rags all over the ground. Shaken up by her screams, I slowly picked up the rags, threw them out. I looked around and ran back to the office. The whole run, I didn't see anyone and didn't hear anything, which was weird because my boss said otherwise. I'll count my blessings here though, and find myself in front of the office finally. The man was leaving. This time I looked at him in complete terror as he turned my way and said, "Come with me." I wasted no time running past him, into the office and slamming the door behind me. What did I mess up? I yelled over the sound of banging on the door as I pulled a jacket over my head. I shivered in fear for the entire hour until I heard 3 knocks on the door. I shot up, threw the door open to reveal my boss and then yelled, "What the hell did you just put me through?" I was mad, although relieved to see him, who looked a lot more colorful and lifelike than he has in the past. He looked at me and smiled at me. "Go home, kid, get some sleep." I yelled back, "No! I want answers. You cannot just tell me to go after the night I just had." He looked at me and said, "You took care of my cemetery, kid. I thank you for that." He held out his hand for a handshake. The name James Randall Hackney, and I'd been dead for 200 years. Every Halloween, I leave the cemetery and recharge so my physical body does not perish. You covered me last night, and I thank you for that. It didn't take me long to recognize his name as the same on the gravestone that was dug up. I stared back at him, mouth wide open, speechless. I walked out of that door, packed my house up, and never came back to this town again. Stories for my daughter. I know they say Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year, but for me it's Halloween. I deck the hall with cobwebs and fake spiders. It's just such a special time. Autumn is here and the leaves are beginning to fall. It's a time for dressing up and suspending reality. We sit in our cozy homes with our jack-o'-lanterns and candy, scaring ourselves, and almost will ourselves to see something otherworldly. My daughter has always loved scary Halloween stories, and last year was no different. We were at the kitchen table, hollowing out our pumpkins and drawing scary faces on them ready to carve. As we scooped the stringy seeds into a large bowl on the table, she asked, "Is it time yet? Time for stories?" "Okay," I smiled at her. "Where should we start? How about the monkey's paw?" No, that's an old one," she grimaced. "Tell me something new." Okay, and I glanced out of the window and saw the moon disappearing behind a cloud. "Right, I've got one for you." And as we scooped and carved, this is the story I told her. Once upon a time, long ago, there was a boy named Jacob, and he lived with his father in a house on the outskirts of a forest. One night his father roused him from a deep sleep. "My son," he whispered, "I have to go out. One of the women in the village is about to give birth, and I must be there." Jacob's father was the village doctor and much respected. "But father," Jacob mumbled sleepily. "What about the wolf?" There had been sightings of a large wolf around the edges of the village and the forest, and the villagers were living in fear. "Don't be afraid, son," his father reassured him. "I'll lock all the doors and windows, and you'll be perfectly safe." The boy's chin trembled, but he trusted his father and agreed to try and go back to sleep. Once his father had gone out, Jacob couldn't sleep. Every noise and creak in the house seemed amplified. He took his blankets from the bed and curled up in front of the window, waiting for his father to return. He saw the full moon through his window and was comforted by the light. Smells of the night forest wafted through his window, and he dozed fitfully. Eventually, he saw the lights from his father's car coming back up to the house. He was so relieved he ran to meet him. Jacob's father saw a huge wolf bound out of the house towards his car. But before he could do anything, he heard the sound of a shotgun, and the wolf fell to the ground. From the edge of the forest, a group of villagers appeared. They had formed a posse and been out hunting the wolf. At first, they didn't understand the doctor's anguished cry. "What have you done?" he yelled, and he ran to the spot where the wolf had dropped, grabbing its body and cradling it in his arms. As it took its last breath, the villagers were horrified to see the wolf's massive furry body transform back into that of a child. "So the doctor's son was the wolf?" my daughter asked, her brown eyes wide. "That's a sad story, Mommy." "I guess it is, sweetheart, but sometimes horror is sad as well as scary. Anyway, I think these are ready to be lit." Our pumpkins were finished, and we carried them into the living room. We put them on the low table in front of the TV and lit candles in them. Tradition dictated now it was time for spooky cartoons. She'd seen them many times before and quickly got bored. She picked up a dusty pack of tarot cards from the table. "Tell me my future, Mommy." I sighed. "I don't like to use those anymore, honey. How about I tell you another story?" "Is it about tarot cards?" she asked. "No, although the magician in it did use cards to do some of his magic tricks. This story is called Smoke and Mirrors." She curled into me on the sofa and I began. Once upon a time, there was a man, and he made his living doing magic tricks. He did children's parties and very small venues. He wasn't very good, and most of the time people could tell when he switched cards or pulled things from up his sleeves. Then one day he was browsing the local newspaper when he saw an advertisement. "Free to good home. Pair of magic cabinets. Amaze your audience." Well, he was very keen. He didn't earn much money, and that was the kind of thing he would love to use in his act but could never afford. He quickly rang the number on the avert and arranged to go pick them up. When he saw them, they were more than he could have ever hoped. They were roughly 6 feet tall and hexagonally shaped. Each outside wall was covered in full-length mirrors. The doors on the front swung open noiselessly, and the interior was lined in plush black velvet. The magician couldn't believe his luck, and asked why the man was just giving them away. The seller just replied that he had no use for them anymore. "So, how do they work?" asked the magician. The seller disappeared back into his house for a moment, and came back carrying a large cage with a parrot in it. "I don't know how this works," he admitted. "It just does," and he put the parrot into one of the cabinets. He walked to the second cabinet, and knocked on the door 3 times. "Welcome back," he boomed in a very theatrical tone. A hissing sound came from the first cabinet, and smoke could be seen coiling from the cracks around the door. He opened the door of the second cabinet, and there was his parrot in its cage. "Oh, these are marvelous!" squealed the magician excitedly. He loaded them into his dilapidated old van. "Just one word of caution," said the seller. "When I procured them, I was told under no circumstances to use a human being when doing this trick. I suggest you invest in a parrot yourself." The magician nodded his head eagerly, and went on his way. After this, things quickly picked up for the magician. While the rest of his act was still mediocre at best, people were very impressed with his magic cabinet act. He would leave the cabinets where people could examine them during his performance, and do his transportation trick last. For most of his act, the audience would be barely watching, poking and prodding at the cabinets, and trying to work out their secret. The magician was very proud of his new act, but something was bothering him. He currently used either a rabbit or a goldfish in a bowl for his cabinet trick, and he felt there was something a little dull about that. One day, as he was reaching the finale of his show, he realized his rabbit had escaped. He tried to explain, but the audience began to jeer him. Someone from the crowd shouted out that they would quite happily get into the cabinet. In desperation, he agreed. A tall, muscular man made his way through the audience and got into the first cabinet. The magician was very nervous. He knocked on the door of the second cabinet and loudly announced "Welcome back." Clouds of hissing smoke roiled from the first cabinet, and the door of the second cabinet swung open. The tall, muscular man stepped out. He looked a little dazed, but none the worse for his experience. The audience clapped, and that was the show over. For the next few months the magician carried on with his show, sometimes 2 performances a day, only now he used audience members for the transportation trick. He thought it looked more impressive, and the audience loved it. One evening after a busy day he was sitting relaxing watching TV, when he saw something that made his blood run cold. There was a story on the news about a man who had gone crazy and killed his family with a kitchen knife. The magician recognized the man instantly, the tall muscular man who had been the first to go into his cabinet. He couldn't eat or sleep, and nagging fears ran through his mind. In the end, he determined to go visit the killer in prison. He faced the killer through a thick glass pane. He picked up the phone on the wall next to him and gestured for the prisoner to do the same. "You may not remember me," he began. "Oh, I know who you are, Magic Man," the killer interrupted. "And I'm glad you've come. I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" stammered the magician. "For what?" "Why, for welcoming me back into the world," smiled the killer. "I don't understand." "It's so much cooler here," the killer smirked. "So much cooler and so many opportunities." "I don't understand," repeated the magician. "Why did you kill your family? What happened in the box?" The killer began to laugh. It was a sound that chilled the magician to the bone. "So it was an accident?" He laughed harder. "You stupid little man, didn't you know? Your cabinets are portals. We have been watching and waiting for so long. We can't fit into parrots or fish or rabbits, but give us a human body. A demon can fit nicely into a human body. How many people have passed through your cabinets, Magic Man?" And with that, he dropped the phone and got up and walked back into the prison. The magician sat numbly. In his estimation, it was well over 100. Oh, my daughter's eyes were like saucers. So, 100 demons on the earth? Oh, at least I chuckled. I'm not sure the magician's math was very good. Anyway, baby girl, it's getting very late now. It's time we tucked you up in bed. We headed up the stairs and got her settled. She was very sleepy now. It had been a long night. Tell me the Halloween story, Mommy, she asked. Now which story would that be? I teased. How about the one about the hitchhiker? She shook her head. The Halloween story, Mommy, she giggled. Okay, I smiled. Now you're sure you won't have bad dreams? She shook her head more vehemently and grinned. I would never understand why my daughter loved this story so much, but I began. Once upon a time there was a kindly queen, and she lived in a big castle in a kingdom far away from here. Her husband, the king, however, was mean and cross almost all the time, and one day he threw her down the castle stairs. The queen was badly hurt, and after that, she couldn't have any children. She had always loved children, and every Halloween she would invite all the children from the surrounding village to the castle, which would be decorated with hundreds of carved pumpkins and thousands of candles. She'd give them the finest treats, and the children always had a wonderful time. Eventually, the king died, and the queen was left alone. Now, I know you probably think she'd be pleased that the evil king was dead, but all that happened was that she got more and more lonely. She realized what she had missed out on in her life and became sad and bitter. Her heart grew cold and black. She would look from the castle tower and see the little children playing in the courtyard, and it no longer gave her joy. Their laughter grated on her like nails on a chalkboard, and an evil plot hatched in her mind. The next Halloween she shooed the cooks and the maids from the kitchen and prepared all the Halloween treats herself. They were the most sumptuous candies and cookies, made with only the finest ingredients. There was one ingredient she used that had no place in her recipes. She liberally mixed rat poison in with the sugar, and there was sugar in everything she made. Just like all the years before, the children came to her Halloween party, and like every other year, they stuffed themselves with all the goodies the queen had provided. As usual, they all had a wonderful time, and at the end of the night their parents came and took them home. That was a terrible night in the village. Some of the children were terribly sick, and a lot of them even died. I heard a tiny snuffle from my daughter and looked down to see her sleeping peacefully. I kissed her forehead and made my way quietly out of her room. If she made it to the end of the story, she'd always say, "And that's why I'm not allowed to go trick-or-treating, isn't it, Mommy?" I thought back to the inspiration for my cautionary tale. That terrible Halloween night 6 years ago, when some crazy woman had poisoned the children's candy. The sound of sirens filled the night air, and there were parents panicking and crying in the street. My neighbor came rushing out of his house, holding his limp son in his arms. The jack-o'-lantern on the step tumbling down in front of him and splattering into mush on the sidewalk, while he made a noise of pain so terrible it barely sounded human. I stood on my porch and stared at it, unable to comprehend the horror unfolding in front of me. Some of the children were dead before an ambulance even arrived. The clock on the mantelpiece downstairs struck 12, pulling me back to reality, and I turned and looked back into my daughter's room. The witching hour had come and gone, and our special day was over. Her bed was empty,